It's December 12th here in Mullumbimby, New South Wales, in 2019, which makes it December 11 in Santa Monica, where we have Jim Strohecker, who I've known for 25 years.
24 years.
24. Okay, you got it down to the exact number.
I just did the math.
What we're going to do today is find out who you are and why, and what led you to become the stellar figure that you are in the field of holistic, alternative, wellness. You've probably bridged more disciplines in this arena than any other person I've interviewed. But we want to find out, first of all, how you got to where you are, and we will have links to more of what you've done, including healthy.net, which was the first and largest holistic health website. So take it away, Jim.
Jack, I need some questions. Throw me a bone.
So what's your earliest memory
I respond to questions.
Of having an interest in health?
I think it probably would have been high school. And I was very active in playing different sports just for fun, not for like high school teams or anything. And so one of the things we figured out is that if you exercise a lot, you're feeling better. And another thing I discovered at the time, because there wasn't much happening, was going to weight rooms. And this was sort of prior to health clubs, or actually if there was a health club, all they would have was some barbells. So that was sort of a sense of doing something that within that frame of reference seemed to be, positive, for you. And then I started getting interested in diet, nutrition, trying to eat a little better, with the sort of standard, 1960s diet at the time, living at home with my parents. So as you can imagine, it was a little bit of a challenge. But it wasn't really until I got into college and really started to explore big questions in a deeper philosophical way, an existential way. And at one point,
you grew up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
And you had probably talked like a Tennessean at one point?
Sort of. My father was from Pennsylvania, and there were people in my town from all over the world.
Oh.
And my mother was from the South. She was from West Tennessee, near Memphis. But everyone was brought there in 1942 for the Manhattan Project, and it was a secret city that was farmland in 1941 and had 90,000 people and huge plants and a whole city built in sometime in 1942. So it was a very quick transformation and a fascinating place to grow up with scientists from all over the world and people who came into work from all over the world and all over Tennessee. And it was also a place that was maybe 2-3 miles maybe 5 miles from coal mines, and who were in the foothills of the Appalachians. So it was a real fascinating place to grow up with the various cultural intersections, and also, the South in the 50s.
I'm sure that had a lot to broaden your perspective compared to if you'd. I grew up in a little cow town in Ohio where we ate Velveeta cheese.
So I was maybe like a quarter step ahead of you on the dietary side. I was really impressed by making this shift to Roman meal bread, shifting from white bread, thinking I'd made a real seismic shift.
So you were born in what, 48?
52.
52. Oh, okay. And then you went off to college. Where was that?
University of Tennessee, close by.
In Nashville?
Knoxville.
Knoxville, okay. Notice I said Knoxville.
You say that like a true Southerner, Knoxville.
Well, my cousins all live in Louisville.
Okay. So you've learned well.
What did you study?
A number of things, but I ended up in anthropology and philosophy, and then I was just my degree was in cultural anthropology, and I was making sort of a shift at the time to religious studies, primarily to explore Eastern religions. But that happened right as I was getting out. And that was a time, as I mentioned, I'd really begun to explore deeper, bigger questions. And this was, early 1970s, Watergate, Vietnam War. So a lot of stuff was going on, lots of protests. It was a time of real unrest. And I think I was probably questioning my place in the society and how I fit into the society and the values and the morals and the various things that were happening. So everything was being questioned at that time. And my path was originally taking like a philosophical direction, which then turned into a spiritual direction pretty much after sort of discovering yoga through a book, Autobiography of a Yogi, and then really starting to dive really deeply into the yogic literature, and had the good fortune within about really a year's time to meet 3 extraordinary teachers, each of which introduced me to the next one. So I felt very fortunate to have sort of a quick accelerated route, into the heart of yogic practice and that particular spiritual path.
Who were the teachers, just for the record?
Well, my first teacher, this was quite fascinating. Her name was Mary Candler Smith. I came home briefly from college, and I was really focused on learning yoga. I talked to a friend in my hometown. He said, "Oh, I've got this great yoga teacher, and she lives just down the street from you." Turned out that she was my next door neighbor's sister, my lifetime next door neighbor's sister who I'd never met. And she was probably about 75 years old at the time, which to a 21-year-old, recent college graduate feels ancient and very wise. And she had lived in India for almost 30 years back in the maybe mid-20s to about the mid-50s. She was one of the first Western women to actually study yoga and come back with it. But instead of coming back and teaching on TV or writing books, she just came back and lived her normal life. And none of her friends had any idea what she was doing. But she started like word of mouth. People would find out about her and come to classes in her house. And she would teach us sort of the classic eightfold yoga, teach us how to concentrate, teach us how pranayama, how to breathe before we would even do any yoga asanas, and teaching us to meditate. And we would read the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, or Aurobindo, or someone like that at the beginning of class. So it was really quite extraordinary. And she refused to take any money as well. And we became very fast friends, and she became like a real mentor to me and took a real interest in me and my own spiritual and professional growth as well. But then she left for the summer, and I was feeling a little left behind. And she said, "Well, I think you should go. I'll put you in touch with this person in North Georgia, Roy Eugene Davis, who was a direct disciple. He was a direct disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda, who wrote Autobiography of a Yogi, and he had been a monk with him, and then had just gone off to teach after Yogananda died. So he had a retreat in North Georgia, and I was accepted and went down and spent the summer there, helped them out to the retreat, helped them organize their library, their spiritual library, did some construction and various things. And then Roy said, I want to introduce you to someone at the end of the summer. And he said, there's a yogi who has come to America, and he's the most powerful yogi who has been here since my teacher, Yogananda. And I said, well, great. He said, well, I'm going to be introducing him at a retreat in Indianapolis. So I made a spiritual pilgrimage to Indianapolis to meet this teacher. And it was just a powerful experience, a great experience. And at the same time, after the retreat, I went to the University of Chicago because I was applying for divinity school to study with Mircea Eliade, who was sort of the founder of the field of history of religions and comparative religion. And we had I had a wonderful experience meeting with Eliade. I wasn't expecting to actually meet him. I submitted some things on a paper, and surprisingly, he agreed to meet me the next day. And then he knew what I was doing, what I'd written better than I did, and he was very excited, and I was very excited. And we were looking. They had a master's doctoral program, and he wanted me to come to the divinity school rather than to study in the Committee on Social Thought, because in his words, they were too mundane, I guess you would say. He was known for his book, The Sacred and the Profane, among others. And so anyway, he directed me over that direction. So then in one weekend, I basically had two really great options to study. And then after I was accepted to the University of Chicago, I realized that I was really in conflict, because I was at the time on staff and traveling with Muktananda, and I developed libraries for the ashrams, basically at the time studying to be a monk. And that was sort of what I wanted to do with my life, to be a teacher, a spiritual teacher, and dive deeper into bringing the Indian tradition, the best of the Indian tradition, to the West. But at one point I had to make a decision, and I recognized that what I had really wanted to do was I wanted to get to India and to be able to study there. And so I said, well, I could do it as my doctoral dissertation project a few years from now, or I could just do it. So I decided just to do it. And so that was where I sort of made a detour away from continuing like in the academic world.
And I never would have met you if you had.
Who knows? Who knows? Maybe I would have been at the University of Marin.
Well, two of our wellness center staff wound up in the Oakland ashram. Were you over there, or was that later?
I was. I actually helped. I was one of the original crew and staff who helped to build that, or not build it, but to renovate, because it was quite a disaster when we arrived. And it was a very vibrant place, and it was a specific, point in time, sort of in the evolution of yoga coming to the West, and the big impact. If you probably remember Werner Erhard, and Werner actually had sponsored Muktananda and brought Muktananda and the Karmapa, the head of the Kagyu lineage in Tibetan Buddhism, to the West in 1974, and that's sort of how Muktananda got here. That on his second visit to the U.S. and that's when I met him. So there was a lot of Est people around as well, who had gone through the Est training, and we're looking for the next thing.
Yeah, I did the Est training in '75, and you used to see Muktananda's face on telephone poles all over Marin.
With a little hat, right?
Yeah.
Look like a stone jazz musician, according to the Village Voice. But yeah, it was a really vibrant time, and Werner used to stop by all the time and hang out, and so yeah, it was a very rich time, as you know, in the Bay Area. There was just so much going on with the human potential movement. Esalen was just a couple hours south and outside of Monterey, so there was so much happening at the time. So that was my path to really get into a discipline where I was able to dive deeper and deeper and deeper into the actual practice and the study, which is one of my real joys. And then later, when I basically returned to the U.S. and had sort of decided to go my own path.
Oh, wait a minute. Where were you when you weren't in the U.S.?
India. So I was in India for about 3 years during late 70s, early 80s.
Uh-huh.
And it was an amazing time, and it was just sort of like a depth chamber of personal growth and personal experience, deep meditation, and just lots of sustained spiritual practice and contemplation and meditation. So it was one of the a really great time of my life, and it was great to be in your early 20s and have an opportunity to sort of devote yourself to self-study, self-care, self-culture. And interestingly, there was people from 50 countries and every imaginable health practitioner of every stripe of holistic physicians and acupuncturists and chiropractors and Alexander technique and you name it. There was someone there doing it. So we were sort of surrounded by various alternative practices. I was introduced to Ayurveda when I was there, and many other forms of holistic medicine, holistic health, just by osmosis. So that became another aspect and passion and area of mine that I really wanted to see get more exposure in the West. So there's really sort of a continuum, because in yoga and in India, there's a very strong tie between like Ayurveda, their ancient medical system, between the practice of yoga, between the spiritual philosophy. I very naturally sort of took to learning more about many of these different health and self-care disciplines.
Wow. Yes. So you came back from India then in the early 80s?
81, yes, 1982.
And then was that when you wound up in Santa Monica, or were you still in the Bay Area?
I was in the Bay Area for a few years. There's just sort of reacclimating. It's quite a culture shift to return from being in a culture where you're really just focusing on your own internal growth and your own personal development, and not having a lot of cares about politics and other things that were happening. We used to joke that we probably at the time hardly even knew who the president was. But then again, communications were pretty sparse. So the only way to communicate to the U.S. was through telex, which was really expensive for people who didn't have any money at the time, and which was most of us. And now people go to India and they're like Skyping and on their cell phones and FaceTiming and everything else. So it's quite a different world. Back then, when you went there, you were really there, and there was really the only way to get to anything was basically a very slow letter.
And when you came back, were you in the Emeryville ashram at all, or were you on your own?
Just briefly, and then just started to sort of see what it was I really wanted to do. Not too long thereafter, I went down to Los Angeles and began to get involved in sort of the publishing side of things and working with authors. I'd actually done a lot in publishing. I was running the libraries there, and I was always surrounded by my dream library. So I was constantly reading and having an amazing time. Okay, speakers. Okay, we're getting a shift in default speakers. Are you still hearing me? Okay.
No, it got a lot worse.
Okay. I'm not sure. Let me see if this improves.
I'll pause things. So we had a little gremlin there with the audio, but you're definitely into books, and you're in LA, and what's that bookstore in LA that you were working with?
Well, the Bodhi Tree, which was one of the legendary bookstores for spirituality, personal growth, human potential from back in the 60s. And when we first launched Healthy.net in 1996, we partnered with the Bodhi Tree, and they became our online bookstore. So we were one of the maybe first 3 or 4 online bookstores in the world that I know of. I think Amazon had already started, but because of Amazon, we really couldn't ever be successful because they could undercut anything we could do, and we didn't have the margin. So you could describe it. It really was more of a vanity bookstore from the perspective of the luxury of having a bookstore and being able to sell people's books and be able to put their book covers, on the website next to next to their articles. But yeah, it was really fun to get that going when that first started.
I remember dropping in there once on a trip to LA, and I remember the storefront.
Yeah, it was quite an amazing place, and it closed, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah,
8 or 10 years ago, and it's been sort of revived virtually by another group. But no, that was an amazing place, and that had definitely one of the best bookstores on the planet, for that type of book.
Now, then your editing work eventually led to your doing that massive gold book for.
Yeah. So I just found myself gravitating to different authors, and were being referred to me back in the 80s who were, whether it was books on spirituality, psychology, human potential, creativity, that it was just really a blast to collaborate and work with people. And sometimes it was straight editing jobs. Sometimes we would sort of really collaborate and have a lot of contribution to the book. Other times we'd be co-author. And it was a sort of a nice stepping stone. And we my wife and I had a very interesting experience where we had finally had written our first book called Whole Home Healthcare. So it was a holistic approach towards healthcare. I think it was 1989. And so we were trying to make that jump and that transition for working on other people's books to having your own. So the book was at the printer, and we already had a full page ad in Publishers Group West, with an ISBN number, which basically means it's become an entity in the book world, whether it ever gets published or not. The publisher went bankrupt while the book was at the printer, so the book was never printed. And then none of our publisher friends were willing to publish it because they said that the bookseller is going to be incredibly confused because the book shows as already existing with our names on it. So even if we change the title, the bookstores would look and say, well, isn't that sort of like that other book they did? So it was one of the few books probably that was in the books in print online for probably 10 years after it was not published. And eventually I called Bowker and told them to mercifully let it go, that because you would go to Amazon, it would say hard to find. But the funny thing was, literally just a few weeks after that, I had an opportunity to work on this project, which initially didn't seem to be all that ambitious. It was going to be a book on alternative medicine. It was being underwritten by a wealthy businessman. And I thought it would be like a 250, 300-page book. But after I came in to run the project, it just sort of kept growing and growing and growing. And I started getting a bigger vision, as did he. So it ended up, it was almost a 3-year project with a staff of about 100 at different times. We had everything from out-of-work Hollywood writers writing with us and all sorts of health writers. We had over 400 health professionals around the world collaborated with us on the book, and had advisory board of almost over 100. And it was really sort of an amazing sort of experience with that. So when it was published, the first thing we did, it was cool. The book was called Alternative Medicine: The Definitive Guide. And I like to refer to it as the 6-pound book stop, because it was an 8.5 by 11 hardback, 1,100 pages. The only printer in the U.S. who was willing to print it were the people who print the Donnelly phone book, and and no publisher would take it because it was such a massive book, and they didn't think they were going to make any money. So we had to create our own publishing company, do our own marketing campaign. And the first thing we did, we hand delivered a copy to every member of Congress. And years later, when I would walk through the halls of Congress, I would look in the open doors, and often I would see the book on their shelf, because at the time there was the Office of Alternative Medicine was being created right at that time. So it was really there was a lot of legislation and other things that were going on about that. And then we did a real guerrilla campaign, selling it in doctors' offices, selling it through all the usual book channels. Actually did an infomercial, if you can believe that, as well. but ended up selling something like 750,000 copies of it. And the big publishers told us we'd be lucky if we ever sold 10,000. So it was able to really get out to a lot, to a lot of people. A lot of people in the media got the book, and we kept, was getting contacted about it for years and years and years. But I was really proud of the project and all the people who worked on it, and very thankful for the underwriting of the businessman, because it really reached it reached probably millions of people who needed to find alternatives for at that time for any sort of health condition or issue they may be having, because at the time there really was nothing. There was really nothing available. You really had to look under a rock, or you'd have to buy 100 books to be able to figure out all the stuff that we had there. And so, but that got me thinking with this 6-pound physical object thing, the 6-pound book stop. So there's got to be a better way to deliver information to people. And also that we typeset the thing in Quark. For those who remember Quark Express, which was an absolute nightmare. And then the thought of ever having to edit or retypeset that thing again was just like, no one ever wanted to think about that. And then right at the time, one of my nephews was saying, Uncle Jim, there's this really cool thing called the internet. And when I'm at a college, I can get on a computer and I can actually type and communicate with someone else at another university. And this was the first I had heard of the internet. And this was well before it had become commercially viable. And then I met someone. We started talking and thinking, and we took a walk on the beach. He said, if you could do anything, what would you do? And I said, I think I really want to take sort of what we've done, the same sort of idea, take it online, instead of having, one article on acupuncture, one article on biofeedback, and so on, and an article on all these different conditions, to literally have hundreds and hundreds on all of these available free worldwide any time of the day, so that people could find life-enhancing or possibly life-saving information that otherwise they would have no way of finding. And we made relationships with probably 40 professional associations, got lots of content from health professionals and health organizations and actually publishers, alternative medicine journals. So we initially had a lot of information for doctors, but even more for consumers. And I think we launched with about close to 8,000 articles when we launched.
What year was that?
Huh?
What year did you launch?
In March 1996. So we sort of got the idea, the seed of the idea, in the fall of 1994, formed the company in early 1995, and then spent about, almost 16, 18 months just on a real hard sprint with a team of about 12 people that we're just going all out to get this up. And I remember we went to Internet World in 1975 in San Jose, and when we entered, as all of us entered, no one was really sure whether the internet was truly going to be a viable entity, or whether it was going to go more the direction of like bulletin board systems like AOL and CompuServe. And when everyone walked out at the end of the event, everyone realized that the internet was happening, and that was the direction things were going to go. And so we really intensified our efforts to move in that direction. And it was really, the conference was a real blast. And I remember I went to the Yahoo booth, and the two kids who founded Yahoo were there from Stanford, and they each had a business card that said Chief Yahoo. They had the pipe and drape booth with a little cardboard sign that said like Yahoo, and a little table, and that was it. Like they had no money at that time. And so I showed them on my laptop healthy.net, the site we created. And I said, well, what do you think? And he said, wow, that's cool. And I said, well, where would it be on Yahoo? And he goes, oh, on What's Cool. And I said, well, how long will it be on What's Cool? And he said, as long as it's cool. So that was sort of the level of sophistication of Yahoo at the time. And then about 2 months later, they got, $50 million or whatever it was, and took off. So it was very much like the Wild West at that time. And so we had the opportunity to be the first on the web to do so many things because no one else had the time to try them or do them. And at one point, there used to be these rating systems on the web that would rate all the websites on the web, like the top 30. And I remember for a few weeks, we were number 23 on the web, ahead of CNN and some other sites. And of course, that didn't last real long, but it was sort of fun at that early stage when things were still so small, to get some nice recognition.
Now, it was called Health World Online at that point.
The company it was actually called Health World, but it was healthy.net, and it's still healthy.net. We've just relaunched the site in a new mobile-friendly platform with all the content, and still have a little bit of tweaking and work to do on that. But it's been, I think one time I sort of calculated, it must be well in excess of 100 million people have come over the years, and even that sounds like a lot. In the web world, that's not a lot of traffic. That would be like maybe a couple of years worth for a big site that's really, really successful. But anyway, just that many people have been reached and potentially helped, through accessing the various articles and information from all the alternative health and integrative health experts and wellness experts, yourself included, on healthy.net.
What the viewers might not realize, because it's gone, but I loved it, was under the name Health World, you had like a campus. It looked like a map of a village with different departments here and there, and it was a graphic intrigue to go in.
We loved the village.
Really?
And you remember your old friend, Tom Ferguson, was the one who introduced us to you, said, you got to meet Jack Travis. And he had like you said, it looked like a village in Bavaria or something, surrounded by this deep, dark forest. And there was a little lake in the center with a fountain, and the nutrition center and the wellness center. And there was one called Self-Care Central, which was Tom Ferguson's. So he provided all the content for that from his medical self-care magazine. So just thinking back to that, all the relationships that we developed with all these amazing pioneers and health professionals, just great souls who contribute, like yourself, who just have contributed so much, to the betterment of the planet.
Now, you wouldn't have been in a position to do this if you hadn't edited that book, which sounds like you were the spine of the book, of knowing these people, knowing the fields, and bringing it all together, and then translating it into an online. This is an amazing integration, Jim. Yeah.
Well, also, I probably would not have been crazy enough to think that it was possible to do that, not having done the other stuff before. But I've been building a lot of these relationships, even going back into the early 1980s, and through various things that I had done. So they just kept sort of growing. And then it's like anything else, this person wants to introduce you to somebody else. You have to meet so-and-so there. And we went to all sorts of alternative health and wellness conferences to meet people. And that's, of course, where we met you. So actually, it was the same year that we launched, 1996. So we launched in March of 1996. In July, we went to the National Wellness Conference in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. And we were looking to collaborate with a lot of the people there. Our plan originally was to create, almost like Health World, to create the same thing for the wellness world, the wellness movement, and get all the experts to contribute and have referral lists of practitioners and the wellness practitioners, and have a really rich environment. We were also planning to do the same thing for the nutrition field and also for the fitness field. So originally we were planning to have 4, and then pretty quickly we realized we didn't have the bandwidth to do that. So the nutrition field became the nutrition center icon on the homepage. The fitness center became the big fitness world, became the fitness center icon on the homepage, and the wellness center became the wellness icon. And of course, you were top on the list of people that we wanted to meet at the National Wellness Conference, because Tom Ferguson said, you've got to meet this guy. You've got to find out about the wellness inventory. Was one of the true pioneers, were the 4 people who really got the wellness movement going in the 1970s. And so I think you actually, I can't remember, you might have even come by our booth and we sought you out. And so we started having conversations about the wellness inventory program and all the things you had done, and your passion about getting the wellness, having the wellness inventory become accessible virtually, through the web, and not just be a paper version. And if I recall, there was a tornado as well at the conference that year. We all had to hunker down in the gym or something, or the gymnasium, as the tornado was going past. But I guess on an auspicious start.
That was the year that we picked up and moved from California to Virginia, and we drove our 86 Volvo cross country and stayed out at Ann Abbott's farm. And that was the only reason I was at the conference that year, is that we were moving, because it was fairly expensive. I only went every few years because it was costly to get there. And we just happened to be coming through. And then I remember meeting up with you once we got to Virginia. Or was that
probably a conference in Washington, D.C., maybe?
Yeah, while we were living, we rented a place before we moved to Shannon Farm. But yeah, I remember that tornado watch. Every year there'd be a good thunderstorm, and living in California, I missed thunderstorms.
Mm-hmm. Basically, I missed that from Tennessee as well. Real live thunderstorms, thunder, lightning. We actually had a little thunder and lightning earlier this fall, so it was a big highlight here in Los Angeles.
We had some here last night, but probably started more fires than it put out. For the background, we're in here. There were 86 fires in New South Wales 2 days ago, and half of them were out of control. And the smoke is awesome. I'm locked in my bedroom with the air filter on to avoid the smoke. But just
looks like you could be in a hospital room. It's all white, and
yeah,
you have a little greenery there. So at least that's still alive.
So historically, the wellness inventory at that point, we had a HyperCard. We had a MS-DOS version that I wrote in what was it? Some language at the time. I don't think it was Fortran. What was it?
COBOL.
Oh no, it was BASIC. BASIC.
Okay. Yeah.
And we were selling discs of it, and then we were trying to do a HyperCard version, which we never got off the ground. And that's when you stepped in the web. I remember learning about the web the first in 95, and like, wow, the World Wide Web. Well, this is something.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it changed, but
yeah, the audio switched again.
It's still okay. But now Health World or Healthy.net, you eventually downsized after the bubble burst and the .com thing. How did that affect you?
Well, pretty significantly, because we were actually in the process of acquiring a couple of small companies. One was a publishing company that had books and magazines and lots of editorial capability, and the other, other was it was a new integrative medicine, a virtual company, and a lot of that was really for some of the algorithms that they'd created around systemizing the various forms of alternative healthcare, like Ayurvedic, chiropractic, and other Chinese medicine, different systems. And when I see what else happened, there was that. And I think we're thinking about another company too, because our original vision of Health World was actually total multimedia. The internet was going to be the core, but as I had a background in publishing. We wanted to have like to produce books and also have like a newsletter and or a magazine and a publishing arm. I had a radio show on national, not on National Public Radio, but on Pacifica Radio, KPFK here in Los Angeles, called Alternative Medicine. So I also wanted to include a radio portion. And then we were negotiating with, it's actually one of them, John Malone, one of the major cable companies, TCI out of Denver, who later bought part of Time Warner. They had something called At Home, which was going to be the first time the internet actually came onto TV. And I believe that the Berkeley Wellness Letter was going to represent like sort of conventional medicine. They wanted us to represent alternative medicine, or alternative natural medicine. Integrative medicine, the term wasn't really being used at the time.
No, that came later. It was
Yeah, so really it was going to be, so we were going to have a channel, our own channel basically that we could run. So the idea was to be like, and that's really why we chose the term Health World too. Is really wanted to be a global company, but something that could start with the very best practitioners, information, resources. Really having the essence and the core of what was really valuable, instead of getting the soup of the soup of the soup of the soup, which you often get when you get, all these derivative people have studied with this person, studied with this person, studied with this person, and then by the time you get the last person, they're sort of far removed from the source. And so I think right at the end of 1990, or maybe beginning of 1996, this was happening simultaneously. I think that company lost something, I don't know, 175 million in the first quarter, and they just stopped all their investment, all the investments they were going to do in all these major web companies. So that sort of fell away, and that shifted us back to basically at that point really just focusing on the web. And then by the time the web downturn came about 5 years later, the combination at that point, as I said, we were in an expansion phase, and with the internet downturn, things shifted almost on a dime, and we found ourselves in a position where we were being acquired, which happened. We were owned by someone else for a couple of years until we got it back. So it really sort of knocked a lot of the momentum that we had at the time. We were the most highly trafficked site in the world that was focusing on natural health and alternative medicine. And eventually Mercola.com passed us up about that time. And that was, and with changes that Google was doing in search engines, things that were beyond our control, we started seeing things like they would make a change in an algorithm, and the next day our traffic would be cut in half. So it seemed to be sort of a losing sort of proposition, long term. And by this time, right at the same time, we were programming the wellness inventory. And we got really excited about the wellness inventory, your wellness inventory, and working with you on that. And that's when we really began to sort of pivot more to that side, and sort of slowly over the years pulled back, from the focus on healthy.net. Because my real passion, and this goes back to yoga, was not so much trying to fix or alleviate health issues as much as helping people to learn how to take care of their own internal human operating systems, so that we can learn how to more take care of ourselves, learn the principles to live well, so that we can begin to reduce our dependence, particularly upon allopathic medicine, but really almost in any form of medicine, but just have an intelligent relationship with the practitioner, so that when you really needed it, you can have it, and you could really be a partner in working with a practitioner to bring yourself back to balance.
That's
So
where the coaching model showed up.
exactly. So then we actually I was with Dr. Michael Orlowski at the International Coach Federation meetings in 2005, and one of the keynoters made a statement. It said the next trend in coaching is going to be health and wellness coaching. And Michael was already doing that, and I was already thinking about it. But as I watched people in the room, they just looked at each other in astonishment, like, "What in the heck is that? What's health and wellness coaching? We know life coaching, but wellness coaching, health coaching, what's that?" So, and then you introduced me to Bobby Burdett, and then we worked to create our wellness inventory certification training, and that was one of the great gifts that you provided. And of course, Bobby had worked with you really through the entirety of the Wellness Resource Center in Mill Valley.
Well, she came on in the second year. There's some scuffling around your mic that's picking up movement on your mic. If you can change it.
How's that?
Yeah, it stopped. Yeah, Bobby actually was my secretary. We'd grown large enough. Ken and Linda were my first two people, and Joy was working out on her own, but we sent clients up to her office. And Ken said, "You need a secretary." And so he interviewed like 10 or 15 people, and he picked 2 or 3 for me to interview. And Bobby was the one I picked. She was shocked when she went through the folder later and saw who the others were, because she was working for a music company in sort of an alternative music in Sausalito as a secretary. And then I discovered she knew more about nutrition than I did, as well as a lot of other fields. So she quickly became the manager of client services, and really was the backbone, my left-hand woman, if I was her right-hand man. And so it was a year or two into our fledgling start, but she really was the driving force in the seminars that we did and organizing things. And then it was Maren who came up with the idea. I remember at breakfast, she said, "Well, why don't we introduce Bobby to Jim?" And you didn't meet for how many years physically?
Maybe a year and a half.
I thought it was longer than that.
Maybe it could have been.
I remember when you finally met up, it was like.
It was a funny story, because we'd never met. We'd logged, hundreds and hundreds of hours on the phone, and we'd gotten very close. And one of our clients owned Allied Chiropractic, which was like 50 chiropractors' offices throughout the state of Wisconsin. And he had an annual conference, and he loved the wellness inventory and was trying to figure out how to integrate it. So he invited us to speak keynote at his conference. So at the same time, it was when Bobby arrived in Wisconsin, was the day we were teaching one of our classes, which we had to do from the hotel room. So Bobby, I think, was a little bit late. So by the time she knocked on the door, and I think I'd had to get a suite, so there was ability to have 2 different people on 2 different phones in 2 different rooms, so it wouldn't be making noise on top of each other. So she knocked on the door after checking into her own room, and literally it was like 30 seconds from the start of the class. So I hugged her and showed her where to go to get on the phone. And I said, we'll talk later. So we did a really great class together. And then at the end, we were able to sit down and see each other face to face. And so that was sort of a funny story. But, teaching virtually, we trained people in 35 countries. And so many people, you just have a phone, basically a phone or a Skype or whatever, relationship, and sometimes you've never done FaceTime or anything else, so you just have these sort of voice relationships, and it's amazing the depth of relationship and the depth of communication you can have with someone that you've never physically met. And so I've always found that to be one of the really sort of rewarding aspects of wellness work, and particularly the virtual work.
Now, I'll insert here the fact that I haven't been able to interview Bobby because she up and died on us a few years ago.
Yep.
And lung cancer, and she'd never smoked. It was really terrible, but she modeled a wellness death with the help of other coaches that I think was also, her dying words or dying act was to model how to die from a wellness place. And so I'm sad that we don't have any footage of her, but that's what happened. So now we've got the wellness inventory online and the coaching program, and I was astounded because when I first printed the thing up and sold 50 copies the first year, I never thought it was going to get out of California or into anything other than a few weirdos. Ardell actually printed 1,000 copies and gave them out at a health planning conference in Florida, and that was astounding to me. Mm-hmm. But then you picked it up and have brought it into populations I never dreamed of. You had to de-Californicate it a little bit, but your single-handed devotion to you and Bobby revising it and taking it out in the world. Say more about that, because I'm still astounded that I never thought it would have the kind of reach you're making it have.
Yeah, well, when we first started, my assumption was it would be something that would be purchased by individuals, like consumers, and because there are like
I've lost your audio now. We've lost you.
Can you hear me?
Now you're back. Good.
Okay. It seems to have about a 5-second lag, and since workplace wellness, which was basically disease model wellness that was taking place in the 80s and 90s, already had some history. I thought, well, probably the workplace wellness will be another market, but at the time, the wellness, even then, I mean, the wellness term wasn't being used much. It was used in the workplace. I think when you say that was probably and the National Wellness Conference, but I mean, it wasn't like a real common word that people colloquially were using, and it certainly wasn't being used very much commercially. So we really thought that it was going to be a more limited type of audience, but as we began to talk about it, take it to some conferences, and really just people find us, we started getting approached by world-class spas and companies and universities, obviously like wellness coaches, health professionals, and just a sort of a wide array of hospitals, insurance companies. Not everyone ended up being a ticker, but we started to discover that there was really an amazingly broad potential application that was mainly just limited by cultural factors, primarily because most everyone in the culture, other than like sort of a wellness even the wellness culture, most people were still in a disease model mindset. So if you go back to the World Health Organization's original definition of wellness, that wellness is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. That initial definition of health, which I really think was responsible, that's really wellness. And I think what happened was that because no one was taking it seriously, and everybody was still sort of defaulting to health is the absence of illness in the medical field as well as in the consumers, that the grandfather of the wellness movement, Halbert Dunn, who was also a WHO consultant, as you know, I really think that at one point he began to think, well, if no one's going to talk about, if doctors aren't going to talk about levels of health as opposed to just levels of disease, maybe we need to call that something else. And I think that's why he came up with high-level wellness, because we really look back at that definition. Their definition of health really is the definition of wellness. And had that definition of health really been embraced, maybe wellness never would have had to have been the term been created. But because of that, I think that's pretty much why it did have to be created. But in the meantime, so many of the people using the term wellness are using it in a disease model framework. That wellness is primarily synonymous with prevention, or it's about preventing illness and lowering healthcare costs. And I like to refer to it as where the whole person circle became a square. So even though it's still partially true, it's really sort of reduced in its capacity or its potential because it's been circumscribed in such a way that it can't really go very deep. And because of that, because of the sort of prevailing, disease model mentality that has pervaded our culture, it's taken some time for things to begin to shift. And I think it's been helped by multiple concurrent cultural streams of, for example, the growth of yoga and meditation, the growth of mindfulness, the growth of coaching, positive psychology, neuroscience. There's so many different sort of parallel streams that have been heading towards similar conclusions that I think prepared more and more and more people, particularly professionals who were in their silos, to think a little more broadly. So now when we talk about a whole person wellness concept, more and more people and more organizations and more fields of knowledge are capable of wrapping their heads around it and making it relevant. So when we look like at universities, for example, we had some early adapting universities in maybe 2008, 2009. For the most part, student wellness was pretty much non-existent, and if it did exist, it probably was just about going to the health center and getting some screenings, some preventive screenings, where it might have been like getting counseling sessions if you had severe depression or anxiety, but it was all reactive. And worksite wellness in the military, so many other places, what they would call wellness really was more like, again, disease model. And I think that one quote that I really love came from Senator Barbara Mikulski, who was from Maryland. She was the longest serving woman in the U.S. Senate history, and she was originally a social worker. And in one of her statements on integrative medicine at a hearing of the Senate Health Committee, she said that prevention is an outdated concept. The new concept is creating wellness. And I really thought that was profound because because she really captured like this, even this prevention mentality that we have to prevent illness, as opposed to creating wellness, which does the same thing, but it also provides you with so much more. And the other is just sort of like a what can I do to prevent this negative outcome, as opposed to how can I prevent negative outcomes from occurring while at the same time enhancing my overall level of health and well-being so I can live better, be happier, and have a richer life. So I think that what I've noticed since 2000, there's been sort of a slowly accelerating acceptance of a more sort of holistic or whole person paradigm or view of what it means to be human, and that needs to be tended to for us to really be whole and well. And it just, each year, it just seems to accelerate more and more. And just 2 years ago, the American Bar Association recognized that the state of well-being of their attorneys and judges was so abysmal, and that the public had begun to potentially was going to lose faith in the profession, that they put together a task force to put together this wonderful 80-page report called The Path to Lawyer Wellbeing, because they had such a high incidence of burnout, suicide, divorce, gambling addiction, substance abuse, and so many other mental health issues, that they felt that it was really like a level of an emergency. And a lot of it was the things you would imagine, like mindfulness and other sorts of approaches to allow people to be more centered, to better cope with the stresses of life, to be more resilient. But a lot of it was dealing with the actual structure, the organizational structure of law firms themselves, and like the legal profession. Like what do we need to change in order to create a way of functioning that can support human well-being rather than be so deleterious to it. And we're beginning to see the same things with healthcare. And Harvard recently put out a wonderful report on, I'm trying to remember the exact name, but about the seriousness of physician burnout. And just a few weeks ago, I got an invitation to a conference, which was unfortunately 3 days later across the country. But it was a very high-end conference with participants from all the major insurance companies and hospitals and medical schools about the serious problem of physician burnout and very systematic ways to deal with it. So it's really gotten the attention. In a lot of fields, there's such a high prevalence of burnout, and of course, usually one of the solutions is either focus on wellness or well-being to help bring about normal functioning in these cases. So, and this is really where the rubber meets the road, because this is like hard economics, and also, really, sometimes fields of or professional fields almost running scared, recognizing they've let things go too long and they've really got a crisis on their hands. So that's really encouraging to see. Same thing with teachers and educators. So many fields have a high prevalence of burnout, and that's beginning also to open lots of doors for us as well. And then just getting to looking at the university students. The American College Health Association has a Healthy Campus 2020 modeled on a healthy community, I think, from the World Health Organization 2020, that looks about creating a culture of well-being or culture of wellness on campuses, so that there's an environment that promotes wellness for not only the students but for the faculty and staff, and looking at all the different aspects of the environment, of the culture, of how rules and regulations, how things are done, how people are fed, how they recreate, how they get their exercise. So a lot of this is beginning to penetrate right into sort of the heart of our culture. Another big hotbed is going to be faith communities, because faith communities will be a way that wellness can be disseminated to huge groups of people, because they already have a high trust environment and community where the trust is built around spiritual community. And taking the next step towards learning how to live well is a pretty easy step, because it's not like you're going into a workplace and say, where we're paying you and we really need you to produce, and at the same time we want you to get well, so we want you to do all this stuff on your time, and we really don't want you to do it because we want you to be working and making money for us, but you really need to be doing it. So it's not like an ideal scenario to deliver wellness, because people feel very conflicted, because they're already often stressed, very stressed at work to begin with, particularly if they're working 50, 60, 70 hours a week and having to be accountable 24/7 for texts and emails and all the other ways that you receive communication. So it's a very challenging time in the 21st century, but also it's a time that wellness is really stepping up.
It's interesting. This is taking me back to my senior year in medical school. I published an article in the American Medical Association on information overload. This was 1969. My first wife drew the art for it. And then the closing days, our wellness center, the last few years that we ran it, we were doing seminars called From Burnout or Preventing Burnout in the Helping Professions. This is late 70s. And then Maren got involved in feminist spirituality, and I learned about patriarchy and the dominator model. So then we did From Domination to Partnership, and using Starhawk's Truth or Dare as a textbook, we were giving people tools for changing the culture, the culture making, we called it, of the power over dominator model versus power with, which is the coaching model. And glad to hear it's finally getting some traction in the mainstream, because it was pretty frustrating 40 years ago.
Oh yeah, because it's like everything you've done, you've always been way ahead of your time, and that's always a challenge in this world, because you're talking to a dedicated but much smaller group of people, and then trying to move beyond that subset of people into a slightly broader application of the culture is very difficult, because you're really speaking a different language, a completely different paradigm, a paradigm that they're not familiar with. Just like if someone has gone through business school and they've been, and also have been mentored, in a very old-fashioned way of doing business, where you motivate through fear, and it's really a dominator model, and that's the only way to keep people in line, make them be productive. If that's your model, you're going to have a really hard time hearing something that's more about partnership, because you're going to may go in one ear and out the other, unless you're forced to go to enough seminars, and eventually it begins to catch. But the great thing is that often someone like that will go to another company, and there'll be someone who's in leadership that's modeling that behavior, and it's very appealing. And at some points, someone really wants to learn. Well, where did you learn this? What is it you're doing?
But then you've got a culture that it's so enmeshed in the culture, and what we think of as free will is often not, because it's like the fish and not being aware of water, we're struggling. I want to get back to some personal stuff here, and wrapping up. It sounds like you're getting some coaching there from Nancy. You did mention a wife way back when, and I know you are partnered with Nancy. You've done work together, and
absolutely.
But your practice, your daily practice. I know you have a cat that's very important to you, or you did. Is the cat still with you?
No, Jingles passed on about 1.5 years ago.
Yeah.
So, or actually, almost 2 years ago.
You take your daily walks, and you have your backyard where you meditate, and I'm impressed when I come to visit you. You practice what you preach. But
well, the funny thing is, the more you explore and pursue, it really becomes fun, and it becomes sort of like something that you have to do in order to really feel good and function at a level you want to function at, and you get accustomed to it. So yeah, really just daily practices, things you found that really work to help keep you sort of calibrated. So
yeah, I'm amazed the hours you put in.
Well, you try to integrate things in as much as you can, but sometimes it gets a little front loaded in the day. I'm always amused when I see people talk about their morning self-care practice, and I go, how long does that take? Yeah, so I do, when I first wake up, I do some things around intention, and also I've had a set of exercises that I created that really sort of get every muscle and bone of the body sort of moving in a very rhythmical way to sort of wake the body up, and then take a shower and do some other self-care, meditate, take a walk, and often I'll take breakfast in the backyard, and just in the beauty of nature. And so it's and sometimes some things are added in and others aren't, but as we discover, like in our own training, like small steps for continual improvement, just these tiny steps, little things you can do that you can integrate into your life seamlessly. And there might be attitudes or thoughts or practices or behaviors that can just sort of be slipped in and just become sort of warp and woof of your life and what you do. So I've always felt that that's a really positive approach to take. Just with a small steps model, you can do that for the rest of your life and continue to sort of fine tune and just find what really works for you. And as you age, what helps, to keep yourself vital and keep your mind sharp and keep yourself happy.
And as a plug, the wellness inventory, thanks to Bobby, I think that's been built into the program. I'd always believed that after completing the 120 questions and getting your score, that having a method of guiding people to find the best appropriate changes to make, and you and Bobby have created that. So it sounds like you're practicing what you preach again.
Well, you teach enough, you pretty much can't help avoid that. So, and our certification training is just a blast. And each time we learn so much from all the participants as they're going through their own journeys, and they're bringing all of their life experience and bringing their own unique perspectives. So we're constantly learning every time we're sort of guiding the training and continuing to tweak the training itself as new information and research comes out, and just the new insights that we get from ourselves and from our students. So it's a joy.
Yes. Well, any parting words as we wrap up here?
Well, just really words of appreciation for our many years of friendship and your inspiration with the pioneering work that you've done and the opportunity to sort of co-create with you on taking the wellness inventory to new worlds and new forms, and to continue to train people and of all sizes and shapes and functions, worldwide. So really sounds like we're getting a little. Hang on a second.
Lost you. No.
Can you hear me? Okay.
There, you're back.
It usually takes about 5 seconds for when the audio flips like that. Yeah, so just a lot of appreciation for our friendship and all that all you've brought to the world and what's grown from what you've brought to the world, which I think is just going to continue to grow for many years to come. And it's just a very deep, rich model, to work from. And people still are getting profound results from just exploring their lives and getting that whole person snapshot of exploring areas they never had maybe ever contemplated as being of any importance, and realizing that we have the ability to grow and the ability to change and ability to maximize our potential in areas that were completely off our radar screen prior. So it's a great discovery for so many people.
Well, I'm just so thankful that you're doing this full time, well beyond anything I could have imagined doing. So thank you again, Jim, for sharing with us who you are and why, and some of what. There's a lot more with links that people can explore. But again, thank you, Jim.